All right. So this is going to be a rant, kind of like, yeah, a rant about two subjects that um, I think about from time to time. Not a lot, but every now and then it does kind of like come up because I'm a big fan of these two particular shows, or excuse me, not shows, but subjects, which involve several shows, as well as a few film franchises. Let me kind of like back up just a little bit and let you know that I am a huge sci-fi geek, and two of this, biggest science fiction franchises in history, which are Star Trek and Star Wars, um, are something that I kind of grew up on. I went and I saw The Empire Strikes Back when I was like 5 years old with my mom, and that kind of got me started on everything. That's how I started being a fan of the Star Wars films, um, and science fiction in general. And then when I was like, I don't know, 7 years old, eight, nine, somewhere around there, my mom, who is also a giant sci-fi geek, uh, she basically got me to sit down and watch every single episode of the original Star Trek or classic Trek, um, and I got hooked. Like I was totally hooked. I can remember sitting on the couch with like chips and salsa, just like marathoning the original Star Trek, and I did that like as like between 7 and 9 years old. I don't remember exactly which one, and it doesn't matter. But so anyway, I developed this love for science fiction as I was a kid, which actually I also kind of like really got into Buck Rogers in the 25th century, and also the original Battlestar Galactica from the 70s, which I also saw in reruns like in the early 80s. So yeah, I have like a pretty good grasp of the old, what how a bunch of the science fiction developed from especially the late 60s on up to the 2000s, and now into like the 2020s. Um, but going back to Star Trek and Star Wars, so to this day, I still prefer the original Star Trek, despite its really cheesy um, special effects and its really bad uniforms, and a lot of the design of the series itself, like the visual designs. Some of it's pretty iconic and has remained iconic, like the designs of the starships and things like that. But a lot of it is very dated, um, and you can definitely tell it was done during the 1960s, right? But outside of that, the reason, like, I can give all of that a pass, and the reason for that is largely due to the writing. Most of the episodes that were written, especially for the first two seasons of original Trek, were like outstanding. Like the actual stories, the character development, and the plots that were involved were incredibly innovative for the time. And actually, even the special effects were pretty innovative for the time. Even though today we think of them as, oh my gosh, that's terrible, but for the late 1960s, it was pretty freaking amazing. But the thing that really set the series apart and why it developed the cult following that it did was because of the writing and the concepts and the like the high level concepts, the real thought that went into thinking about what would the future be like, what would alien civilizations be like, what would happen if such and such occurred when our heroes arrive at this planet and such is going on. There was a lot of that sort of thing that I really found worthwhile. And as the part of the rant that I've got right now is that, and I know that I'm not alone either in believing this, but as the series, each successive iteration of the Star Trek franchise has successively dropped in IQ level, and it has successively dropped in quality of storytelling and in writing, in adult writing. Okay, and I don't mean like triple X. I mean like the actual. This is written for an adult audience that understands concepts that take some critical thought. You could argue like some of the episodes in the original Trek in the third and last season. You could make the argument that some of the episodes in that season were significantly dumbed down, and I personally think that they were. The quality was absolutely not as good as during the first two seasons. But even then, even with the bad episodes of the original Trek in the third season, they're often far more. If you can get past the visual camp, okay, the actual writing is what I'm talking about, and the story development and character development. And if you can get past all of the visual junk and camp, the writing is still better than a lot of what you see in successive Star Trek television series. Now, if you want to just move on and start talking about Star Trek: The Next Generation, for example, this show actually did a terrible job of living up to its predecessor during its first two seasons. It was like because they tried to do some things, and then you can like give them a pass that they were trying to do something new, and trying to innovate within the constraints of the Star Trek canon, which had already been established. But with that said, like pretty much everybody hated what Star Trek: The Next Generation tried to do during its first two seasons. It had a captain that was boring as hell, that was always on the bridge, never got to go anywhere, never got to do anything because somebody decided, well, it's really stupid that the captain of a starship, who should be like the most valuable player, would go out on these dangerous away missions to planets where you don't know what's going to happen, where anything could, attack you. You could get some disease, or, something bad could happen and you could die. And having your captain be beyond, placing himself into that sort of a risky situation is just wise, and it's bad policy, and blah, 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 blah. And in terms of from a logical point of view, you could, I can see that, right? Well, sunlight's getting in my eyes there, is glaring off my phone. But anyway, going back to this idea of Captain Picard not going out on away missions, and Riker, his number two, or number one, being the man of action like Captain Kirk, and being able, he's the one who goes out on the missions, and he's the one who does all this stuff, and Picard being mostly an ambassador, and very cerebral and very controlled, and not very emotional at all, basically being the antithesis to Captain Kirk, was really not something that very many people wanted. They didn't like that format, and because it came off as freaking boring as hell. Even if you are a big even if you're somebody who likes Star Trek because of the intellectual aspects, and you like the philosophy, the explorations of philosophy, and explorations of moral questions, and all of these kinds of things that are very cerebral. Even if you like Star Trek specifically for those reasons, you still would come off thinking that Star Trek: The Next Generation is really lacking because of the character of Picard. He was kind of like this big Starfleet Federation tool. He was just basically, I obey, no matter what the authority figure, the admirals, no matter what they said, even if it was really like freaking retarded or bad, instead of being an officer with a mind of his own who could stand up and be like, wait a second, this is wrong, or this is really dumb, or whatever, and we shouldn't do it. For the first 2 seasons, Picard just kind of was like a wimp and went along with whatever it was, that Starfleet or the Federation had to say. And, he was kind of like always down on Riker a little bit, and it was, lots of people didn't like it. Some other things that, now, to be fair, The Next Generation did kind of find its legs after its first 2 seasons, and the reason is because the producers and the showrunners they kind of got the hint, and they decided, okay, well, nobody likes the format that we're, like the direction that we're going, so they kind of revamped it. And during the third season of Star Trek, The Next Generation, Picard became more interesting, and so did most of the other characters. They didn't seem so like cardboard cutouts. They kind of really fleshed these characters out. They had episodes that focused on specific members of the Enterprise crew, instead of it just being Picard and Riker and Counselor Troy and Doctor. I don't remember her name right now off the top of my head, which is terrible because I've watched the entire series of The Next Generation too when I was a kid. Gates McFadden, but I don't remember her name for some reason on the show. Anyway, so Next Generation had that they had that going for them, that they were willing to revamp the story and the direction that the series was going in order to make the characters a lot more fleshed out and to make them more interesting to the fan base, which was not all totally new viewers. There was a crap ton of original Trek viewers who came and moved over to the new series trying to give it a chance. And I think that it was mostly due to the original Trek fan base. It was mostly because of them that the showrunners for The Next Generation decided to change directions. Because if they lost that fan base, that show would have been, Next Generation would have been canceled long, long before it was. Then, like I said, each successive Star Trek show really kind of like brought things down, further down a level. You could talk about not only did the powers that be, I think they made a mistake in creating Deep Space Nine, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, while The Next Generation was still airing. I know that they thought that they could do these crossover shows, and I know that they thought that they could basically, like I said, do crossover shows, but they also, for some reason, felt like they could borrow the fame of the Next Generation and thereby give Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which had a format and had a feel to it, a tone that was much darker and much, and that was honestly not boldly going anywhere. It was all stuck right there on a space station, right? So I think that was maybe a big mistake to have two different shows, two different Star Trek shows running at the same time. It's first of all, it split the fan base. Where some, I mean, there's obviously going to be some that watch both series, and I was one of them. But there's a lot of people that are going to be like, I really, really like Deep Space Nine, not so much The Next Generation, and vice versa. But I think that the biggest thing about Deep Space Nine is that it was a series that really should have stood on its own 2 feet by itself. I think it was a series that could have worked just fine outside of the Star Trek universe. Like it didn't have to be Star Trek at all, in my view. It was vastly different in tone and vastly different in philosophy in many ways, and it was all super religious and very. It had like a lot of supernatural kind of elements to it, especially towards the end of that series. But it was also not as cerebral as most of the early Trek stuff was. They did some interesting like cultural interpretations, and they did some explorations of various philosophies on Deep Space Nine as well. But I think that they were very thinly veiled political commentaries on specifically with the use of the Cardassians and the Bajorans. I think that they were trying to make the Cardassians out to be Israel, and the Bajorans were the Palestinians, and that sort of thing. I also think that the show was a little bit, maybe more than a little bit, anti-Semitic in some ways. And I don't know that they intentionally did this or not, but one of the things that really bothered me personally about the show was the fact that the main Ferengi characters on the show, Quark and like the Grand Nagus and several of these other characters, first of all, they're all played by Jewish actors. And second of all, the characteristics of the Ferengi are pretty much the stereotypical bad characteristics that you find in Nazi propaganda against the Jews. So like I said, I don't know that they did that on purpose, but it really bothered me. And I didn't even notice it when I was very first watching the show, but like the more I saw it, I started noticing it, and I was just like, that's really cringeworthy, you know? So I'm not sure that in today's climate, especially, that show actually would have, gotten a green light to be produced, unless there were some big changes made. Then, too, some of the other things that I noticed about Deep Space Nine is that there was another, space station science fiction show on at the same time called Babylon 5. And Babylon 5 was, it absolutely took place in a different universe and a different... it all still revolved around like Earth and stuff, but it was a completely different series. There was no connection to Star Trek, nothing, and it came out, I think, a little bit before Deep Space Nine did, and I know that there have been accusations in some quarters that the producers of Deep Space Nine somehow got wind of a lot of the things that were going to be taking place on the set of, and some of the stories that were going to be taking place within the Babylon 5 production. And they kind of just like, I don't know if stealing is the right word, but they definitely appropriated some things that, there's some like massive similarities that you could claim that somebody somewhere lifted some ideas and then used them with slight tweaks inside of the Deep Space Nine production. Whether or not that's actually true or not, I don't know. It could be a huge coincidence that there's a lot of stuff that's super, super similar between the two series. But I don't know. I'm kind of like of the opinion that there probably was somebody somewhere who like learned about some stuff that was happening with the Babylon 5 stuff, and they just like appropriated it. But with that said, I do think Deep Space Nine, out of the first three that I've mentioned with the classic Trek and the Next Generation, I do think that Deep Space Nine, honestly, if you're gonna rank the three, it would for me it would still be the classic Trek as number one, but then I would have to say Deep Space Nine would come in number two because it was not trying to copy the original Star Trek, and because it actually did do some. I just thought it was more because it was darker. I thought it was more. I don't know if adult is the right word to use, but I think the stories and the writing many times were better than what was seen on Star Trek The Next Generation, except for the later seasons of TNG. The later seasons of TNG were pretty good. So I don't know. I guess I would have it be a toss up between Deep Space Nine and The Next Generation. But then we get to Star Trek Enterprise. Yeah, I love Scott Bakula. I really liked him in Quantum Leap, and I really liked. I thought he did an okay job as Jonathan Archer, but the series itself was just dumb. Like they really, having it be a series that was supposedly taking place in in a time frame that was way before Captain Kirk, before Captain Pike, and you've got like this Jonathan Archer that nobody's ever heard of before. Fine, but you have this starship that has technology that's far in advance of anything that you see in the original classic Trek, Constitution class starships. And I get it that they're like, well, this has to be updated for a modern audience. They have to have some kind of technology that people now don't think is just like ancient. And I understand that, but doing a prequel sort of thing just seemed dumb to me. Why not just move on into the future? You want to do a story about a starship crew in this part of Starfleet? Great. Do it about something that's either on in the same timeline, but around the same time as the Next Generation if you want. You could even do it based on the original Star Trek if you want. But you should basically keep production design consistent if you're gonna do that. The only way they could really do something new is to make something even more into the future from the Next Generation, or to make it so outside of Starfleet that the people are not so that the production is not constrained by stuff that's all that it's so that it's not constrained by things that have gone before. You could have they could have done a series about miners, or like freighters being like kind of like Han Solo, carrying goods from Vulcan to Earth, or you know what I mean. They could have done so many different kinds of stories, that took place within the same universe in the same time frame, as long as they kept everything consistent. And they didn't do that with Enterprise. Enterprise was just, a prequel with things happening and technology existing that the Constitution, top of the line Starship Enterprise didn't have in the classic Trek, and that's just a stupid mistake. Then what else? It also they keep changing, starting with the Next Generation. By the way, changing the not just the look of Klingons, because Klingons definitely got a big change with Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which was kind of like kind of cool. It was kind of cool when you first saw it, but then just making like, especially with the Next Generation, every alien ever, no matter who they are, the only big deal about them is that they have some kind of weird forehead. Like that's really the difference in humanoid species across the galaxy, is the shape of their forehead. It's kind of dumb. Just like you'd think that like the law of averages, or would suggest, or maybe not the law of averages, but the odds would be against the forehead being the or nose ridges, or brow ridges, or polka dots on your skin, being the biggest outward genetic expressions of of humanoid genes across the galaxy. I kind of thought that was dumb. And that's a big criticism of the Next Generation, but it could be that they're based on their limited budget or whatever, which I think they had like $1 million budget for each episode at one point. Maybe they had more, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that they had $1 million per episode at one point. And maybe for the duration of the series. Like I said, I don't remember. But anyway, at least Deep Space Nine had some significant variety of humanoid species to look at, and to delve into their cultures and their another thing. Okay, this is something that I actually did like about Deep Space Nine, is the politics that got played, on board Deep Space Nine. All of the stuff with Garrick, the Cardassian spy, and his interactions with Dr. Bashir, and all of the machinations that went on there. That's something that I do think was potentially also lifted from Babylon 5, because that show is really well known for the political machinations that took place between the various ambassadors on board Babylon 5. But anyway, I liked the interactions that they had with, and like the mystery that they built in around the character of Garrick, especially. He was one of my favorite characters on the show, so I thought that was really cool. I think they also tried to put in like some kind of hints of like a gay attraction, like a homosexual attraction between Garrick and Dr. Bashir. I saw like a documentary that was done like after the fact, where the actor who played Garrick said that he believed that that's kind of like what the writers were going for. I never actually noticed that personally. Like it wouldn't like it's not something that's like one way or the other to me, but it was something that I've heard mentioned, but that I didn't pick up on that. And then, but anyway, okay, well, I kind of went off on a real tangent there. I was talking about Star Trek Enterprise, and I guess I really liked the character of Trip. He was one of the characters that I did like. I thought that Archer, I get he was likable, but he was a little too. I don't know. Like I didn't like his character as much, and I don't know if that's Scott Bakula's fault or if that's the writing, but I didn't like. I didn't. I didn't. I didn't groove with Archer, the way that I kind of did with the character of Trip, and the other, like I think it was kind of like Scott Bakula was playing his character from Quantum Leap as the character of Jonathan Archer. I couldn't get the picture of Quantum Leap out of my head every time, you know, Jonathan Archer came onto the bridge or whatever. That might be a little bit unfair because like I said, I'm a fan of Scott Bakula. I think he did a great job as, I can't remember his name now, but I was a big fan of his character in Quantum Leap. Sam, I think his name is Sam. It's been like 20 something years since I've seen Quantum Leap. Anyway, I guess my final thoughts on Enterprise was that it was just basically kind of another thing something that they did try to do was to explain, why the original Star Trek series showed Klingons that they looked kind of like swarthy humans, like another ethnicity of humans or something with just like really bushy eyebrows, but they definitely looked human in, most of their outward appearance, and they could also appear completely human, as in the case of a Klingon spy in I think it was actually The Trouble with Tribbles, the famous episode Trouble with Tribbles. And so they tried to explain the difference between these Klingons who looked mostly human or completely human, and the Klingons that are seen in the Star Trek films and the classic Star Trek films like the motion picture, and then Star Trek: The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, which they call, there was a Star Trek role playing game by FASA, I think it was FASA, and in that there was like a really really great explanation inside that role playing game, and for what for the differences between these human looking Klingons and the Imperial Klingons, which you see in the films and successive Star Trek series. And I don't know why the powers that be didn't use that explanation as part of any of the television series or movies, because it was a better explanation than what they came up with in Star Trek Enterprise. Another thing that I found really distasteful about Star Trek Enterprise was some of the moral issues that they tried to explore with Dr. Phlox. And it was just, It wasn't just, like, we must hold on to the prime directive, blah 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 blah, at all. It was basically a, let's hold on to the prime directive at all costs and let entire species die out because, hey, that's evolution. It's survival of the fittest. And I was just like, that's kind of, no, it's not. First of all, it doesn't jive with feelings of doctors doing no harm, number one, and it didn't jive with the idea of compassion for another intelligent, sentient species. You know, specifically, there was an episode, and I don't remember the name of it, where they go to this planet, and they find out that there's two sentient humanoid life forms on this planet, and like they've evolved in tandem, right? And over the course of the episode, you find out that one of the species is going to completely die out due to some kind of a medical, like some disease or genetic issue or something like that. And Dr. Phlox finds a way, he finds a cure for it. And then he withholds that cure because it would interfere with the natural evolution of these people. And I was just like, whoever wrote that would be fit right in with the Third Reich. Seriously. It was evil, like seriously evil. I was so angry at that particular episode and the way that Dr. Phlox was portrayed and the philosophy that he espoused. I thought it was despicable, like super despicable. And from that episode on, I kind of stopped watching the show because I just felt that like whoever's like being the driving force behind the moral explorations on the show has gone way off course. It definitely doesn't agree with my view of humanity or, like sentient beings. Doesn't have to be humanity, aliens, whatever. As long as they are intelligent as us, and like if they're just like a living, breathing person, and you're just gonna like let them die, even though you have the cure for whatever it is, you're a piece of blankety blankety blankety. Like I can think of lots of 4-letter words and adjectives to describe somebody like that. And like evil is one of them. So I didn't really enjoy that show that much, especially after that episode. Then there was, after Enterprise, there has come Star Trek Discovery, which there has been a lot of criticism of this show, which I think is well deserved. I hate it. I hate Star Trek Discovery. And it is not because of the actors. I think the actors are totally great at what they do. I don't blame them at all for getting a job and performing in a television series. That's what actors do. But the producers, I find just gross. I don't have any respect for them at all. They're using Star Trek as a bully pulpit to advance a particular philosophy and a particular political viewpoint and a particular they're just advancing politics, very specific politics, and many of those who have acted as apologists for Star Trek Discovery, they'll point back to Star Trek, the classic Trek, as being socially progressive for its time, and it was. And they will point back to ideas of being not just socially progressive, but being on the morally right side of things. And honestly, they but at the point for me is that Star Trek Discovery, like, and when it came to Star Trek, the original Trek, yes, it was socially progressive, which was fine, but it couched that social progressivism within stories that explored a lot of different stuff. And it did not beat you over the head with any particular political view or philosophy. It allowed the viewer to come to their own conclusions. It allowed them to engage in critical thought and be like, well, do I really agree with this, or what do I think about this or this or this or this? They didn't present something as being the morally right choice in every given situation. I mean, there was like, I guess I'll have to backtrack that just a little bit, because there were episodes that were supposed, like super patriotic kind of episodes, where Captain Kirk goes and he ends up on this planet where there had been like an alternate. It was like an alternate Earth, and there had been a war between the communists and the Yankees, and these people were called the Yangs and the Combs, the Yankees and the communists, right? And they obviously portrayed Captain Kirk as siding with the freedom loving, democracy loving, republic loving Yankees, and the communists were obviously the bad guys in the show. And I mean, I agree with that myself from a political, philosophical, economics point of view, but they again, it was very limited, and there was no like actual moral question that was presented. There wasn't anything like with Star Trek Enterprise, where they take something that is morally reprehensible and present it as if Dr. Phlox was doing the right thing by allowing an entire species of people to die off, even though he had the cure for what was killing them. But Star Trek Discovery, they just like beat you over the head nonstop with with not just social progressivism, but with like a very, very specific bent of identity politics, and very, very specific ways of looking at the world that, like, the actual fan base of the original Star Trek and even Next Generation find very, very hard to stomach. And outside of the politics, which it beats you over the head with nonstop, the writing is just so bad and so stupid and so intellectually stunted that it's like a torture to watch. Like, it's really that dumb of a show. There is no like exploring space. There's no real exploration of philosophies. It's like war, lots and lots of great special effects. The special effects on the show are outstanding. The visuals, like all the visuals on the show are really good. They have some like, cliche is not the right word, but they have some like specific moves that have become very like, I don't know, so well known isn't the right word, but that are overly used. They do some things that are overly used, especially with their lighting. They have like these sun flares, even when you're on the inside of the starship, there's like, you go down a hallway and there's like a sun flare, or a camera flare or whatever. So there's definitely some things going on with their production design that are like they just use it way too much. But that's like a minor criticism. The biggest criticisms are absolutely the writing and the fact that they are like just basically a political show. And they the other thing has to do with their characters, which are very poorly written, and that you talk about Mary Sue's, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, you just don't like black women, black strong women, or you just don't like minorities, or you just don't like this, that, or whatever. And that's not true. It's not true at all. Like, I would have zero problem with the character of Michael Byrne being the captain of the starship or whatever position that she wants to, you know, that she's supposed to have, as long as she shows that she's like, you know, had to do something to get there. You know, she doesn't just like automatically know it all. And the fact, like one of the biggest criticisms that I had personally, and I know like probably hundreds of thousands of other people did too, is this stupid thing of like making her the sister of Mr. Spock from the original Star Trek. The sister that nobody knew Spock ever had, and who essentially taught him to stop being autistic, and taught you know, and taught him how to be as smart as he is, because she's just super smart. And she's, but the weird, you know, the weird, freaky, dumb things about this is that it goes against canon in so many ways. First of all, let me get a sip of something to drink here. First of all, what the crap is a human kid doing on Vulcan, you know, and how in the world is she a member of Sarek's household when everything that you know from before, that's in canon in all the books, you know, and the television show, is that humans were not super accepted on Vulcan. Spock, there's a reason Spock was considered like an outcast. And there's a reason that he left Vulcan to join Starfleet instead of going to the Vulcan Science Academy. And Amanda, his mother, was supposed to have been pretty much the first human, not only that married a Vulcan, but that had, you know, like any kind of a high status within Vulcan society. And that was due to her marriage to Sarek. to Sarek. And so this, you know, this sudden insertion of a character that nobody cares about. You haven't done anything to make us care about her yet, you know, of Michael Byrne. Thrusting her into a family that has been already well established and that nobody has ever heard of her before. And then also making her the reason that Spock is so super awesome in the original Trek. It kind of it's like they're intentionally trying to undermine a lot of what, you know, people had come to love and respect about the original Star Trek. You know, this guy, you know, Spock obviously cannot be a, you know, genius or, you know, super logical and super, I don't know what the right word would be right now because I'm kind of like going off the rails. But it's like anything and everything good about the character of Mr. Spock can now be attributed to his big sister, Michael Byrne, which I think is just freaking retarded and freaking not cool, and just an effort to kind of just be like, you know what, Spock's a dude. Spock's a guy. Not just that, he's white. Forget for the moment that he's Jewish, but in real life. But because he's white a white alien with pointed ears, and he's a guy, he's a male, a white male alien. The gender and racial identity politics that are played in Star Trek Discovery, whose initials, by the way, are STD, which it really is when it comes to, like, out of the entire Trek series, if there's any really, like, diseased diseased series, Discovery would be it. But then we've got, like, I guess moving on from Star Trek Discovery, because I don't have anything good to say about the show except that its production design looks really good. Its special effects are great, but that's it. Everything else, I think, just sucks horribly. Then we've got Star Trek Picard. Picard has all the bad things going for it that Discovery does. It's also all about politics and identity politics in particular. You have Picard being castigated and shouted at by people, almost throughout the first season. And it is him being an old white man constantly apologizing for his place in the universe and for having the audacity to have ever been a starship captain in Starfleet. That Patrick Stewart agreed to do this show. I don't know if that's him virtue signaling, or if he needed the money, or exactly why, but I think he lowered himself by doing it. I hope that if I ever meet him, that he doesn't see this particular video, because I actually have respected Patrick Stewart as an actor for much of his career. Like, I watched all of Star Trek Next Generation when I was a kid, and even though I didn't like him as much, even though I didn't like the character of Picard as much as I liked Captain Kirk, I still excuse me, I still liked Patrick Stewart, and I still liked the character of Picard, especially towards the latter seasons. I thought he got to be cool. And then, Star Trek Picard kind of just, like, tears all of that down, and it really just I don't like it. Same thing with how they killed Data, like, allowed Data to die. I just, it's like, let's just destroy all these characters that I loved growing up. Data actually was my favorite character when I was a kid, out of all the characters on Star Trek The Next Generation. And watching how they just, like, basically did an assisted suicide with the character of Data, it just was like another, like, little knife kind of thing to stick in the ribs of anybody who liked the original series or TNG and was like, you know what? We're killing off all of you old guys. Not just killing you off, but we're also kind of, like, trampling all over the ideals that you loved about those shows. The ideas of cooperation and idealism, and, like, there's going to be a bright and better future, because Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard take place in a world where all of Gene Roddenberry's ideals are shot to hell, and they are just really freaking depressing, if you ask me. So the Federation is bad, Starfleet is bad, and all of these other cultures are oppressed by the Federation, which is like, what? That's not like the vision of Gene Roddenberry at all. So yeah, I'm not a fan of Star Trek Picard either. Then you've got Lower Decks, and this is a animated show that I'm not sure anybody actually wanted, and I'm definitely sure it's not one that very many people like. It is done in a style, like a visual style, that is kind of like a lot of the junk you see on Cartoon Network. Like these really like blocky looking characters, and they are, it's like super. It's raunchy. It's not super raunchy, but it's raunchy, and they try to do all of these, a lot of like sex humor and jokes that are just. It's supposed to be a comedy cartoon, based in the Star Trek universe, except it's just not that funny. Like I've watched most of the episodes, and I found myself actually laughing, like literally laughing, I think one time out of watching 12 plus episodes. So yeah, that's after like one season. I've started watching it like another one, so it was like 1.5 seasons, okay, and it's just like there was some moments where I was like kind of like a little bit giggling, and or like smirking, like yeah, but actual like laugh out loud one time out of all of that. And I've been a Star Trek fan for since I was 5 years old, and I'm 45 now, and so yeah, when they got like they've got all of this material that they try to use to comedic effect, and it just kind of falls flat, in my view. It's another series that I'm kind of like. Then there's going to be like this new one called Star Trek Prodigy, and that's also a cartoon. Why we have to have cartoons, even one for a younger audience, I don't know. Actually, I do know, because I think that they're going to try to make Prodigy, another propaganda tool to show to younger kids, impressionable kids, and they're going to just basically use it as propaganda to push more identity politics and that sort of thing. So I haven't seen it, so I can't judge it, but that's what I think is going to happen. Then there's a new series called Strange New Worlds, which is supposed to be with Captain Pike, which honestly, he was one of the only kind of interesting characters in Star Trek Discovery. And the actor who played him did a pretty good job. I can't remember his name right now, but I thought he did a pretty decent job. So yeah, there's going to be like a Strange New Worlds, which I guess is going to be, another prequel that shows what happened with Pike and the crew of the Enterprise before his horrible radiation accident. That's, again, I don't know if that's even needed, Why do all these prequels? Personally, I'd rather see stuff that happens like in the future. Do something that hasn't been done yet, instead of doing all these backstory things where we either know the story, we know what's gonna happen, which we do. We know how Pike ends up. He ends up on Talos 4, and his actual body is radiation wasted away, but his because of the illusionary powers, or the powers of the aliens of Talos 4 to create realistic illusions, he gets to live out his full life with the woman that he loves, and blah 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 blah. So we get that. We already know the end of the story. So why do we got to have a series that leads up to that? I think it's just kind of like, again. So why not just move forward where you have space, the final frontier, These are the voyages, or these are the adventures of blah, 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 blah. and do something different, do something interesting, do something new. It can still take place in the Star Trek universe. We'll be happy with that, no problem. But don't preach and don't, lecture and don't condescend, and give us something with a vision that is worth exploring. And that is all that I've got for this rant for right now. Ciao, ciao.